Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Progression to Analog. Today, we are here with Shira Lazar. Hi, happy to have you here.
I'm so grateful. This is so cool.
Yeah,
We made it happen. I'm in
I
New York.
know.
Yeah.
Glad to catch you in your 48 hours here.
We make it work.
Yeah, exactly. So I know you're the founder of What's Trending and Creators for Mental Health. So before we get into the Creators for Mental Health, would love to know a little bit more about your background with What's Trending.
Yeah, well, I say I'm a broadcaster at heart, which now is just really a content creator because I grew up watching like Ryan Seacrest and Barbara Walters and Oprah Winfrey and Katie Couric. And so I wanted to be that. But I came up at a time where you either could go local news or audition, and digital wasn't even really around. I don't want to like age myself, but it was kind of coming up. Yeah. And I found my place in digital, and I feel like the space embraced me. And so in LA, I really worked my way up. But started hosting for a lot of the websites and apps and mobile companies, and then built my niche in terms of a host in the digital world and an interviewer, and then launched What's Trending from that in 2011. I was at CBS News as their first blogger. I like hosted the first live stream for the Oscars and the Tony Awards, and a lot of firsts because the space was just starting, which was really cool to having witness. Now I could look back over 20 years, the whole industry really starting and changing and evolving. And then in 2011, launching What's Trending, it started out as a live streaming show. We were really one of the first, especially with the legacy news brand, CBS News, and then went off on our own. And that's where I ended up getting thrown into entrepreneurship and independent media, which is, it seems like that's also a hot topic right now. But that happened, in 2011 to me. And we went from then a show to more of a digital media brand and publisher. Okay. So part digital media entrepreneur, exec, part content creator. And then I personally, on my own personal brand channels, cover creator economy trends, emerging tech, AI, and now a lot of mental health advocacy because of everything that I've gone through also, and trying to help others with that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I feel like most are familiar with What's Trending, but for those who aren't, can you explain what it is, what it was designed to be at its inception, and what it is now?
Yeah, What's Trending at the beginning, it was because I was covering the social media space and internet culture, and very few people were doing it. A lot of tech reporters were out there, but then I was telling people, like, I'm not a tech reporter, I'm covering the culture around these mediums and what's emerging from it. So the stars, the people, and also looking at the news through the lens of social media, which is so obvious now. That's how we look at the news. But you have to remember at that time, like, that's not how it was curated. It was either you got calls into a newsroom, or maybe you had your prep sheets, or, you weren't looking towards social media for the news. And so we were one of the first companies to do it, and my work as well. And so it started out as a live show, as I mentioned, like a talk show for the internet, by the internet. And also what was cool about it is it wasn't like executives or corporate folks telling us, oh, we want to do this, this is cool. I was a user, right? I was part of the community. And so I feel like that word authentic, right? That's overused. Like, it felt very authentic. And I was just bringing the people that I was following into these spaces more IRL to say, like, oh, let's get them off the feed. In some ways.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it started as a show, and then when we ended up splitting from CBS News, we ended up expanding more into a company, and it wasn't just What's Trending with Shira Lazar. It was important to me to have something that was bigger than me, where I could also highlight other voices and have other individuals, and also take a break, because the joke is when you launch a company called What's Trending, it's kind of like you constantly need to feed that, which has its pros and cons. And so for me, building up a team around that was really important in order for it to be sustainable. And then we also started working with a lot of big brands, because we would do live shows from major events like South by Southwest and CES and Comic-Con, all these events, and we would do these pop-up studios there. And then the brands like Samsung or a Comcast would want to connect with the creators we would bring to these spaces. And we were like, well, you should pay us for that, right? Like outside of these shows and these events. And so we were kind of doing influencer marketing before that was even really a thing. So that's been really cool to be part of these spaces, as there was no path, right? You are kind of making it as you go. And I like to say, again, that comes with some wins and a lot of losses. Like, you have to be okay with failure, because you're doing things that no one has done, and you're inevitably going to mess up, and that's how you learn. Definitely. So you have to be very comfortable with that, not just saying you had a success. And that's where I think that impacted a bit of my mental health sometimes, because I was like always wanting to win. Yeah. And inevitably, when you're an early adopter and a disruptor, it's just part of the process. So that's kind of a bit of what's trending. And now, over a decade later, oh my God, every year I see on LinkedIn, like the year go by, and I'm like, what? This is crazy. Like I started in my late 20s. I'm 42. I'm very honest about my age, turning 43 this year. You could go on Wikipedia at this point. I've tried to delete it. But, you know, I couldn't have imagined that something I started in my late 20s, I'd still be doing in my 40s. And then you're like, wow, am I ever going to move on? Like, what happens? But it's cool because I finally, I think, gotten into a place where it's more sustainable. I have a great team. And now daily you can go on our feeds and see what's trending. And it's really about news, culture, conversation around what's happening on social media, and trying to curate that and really give you context as to why this is trending and what you need to know in the online conversation. So that's basically who we are today. And so follow us, what's trending. I got that very early, so we're trademarked.
Is being so close to the idea of what's trending part of what got you into the mental health space? Because I'd imagine that if you have to be so close to this always on news cycle and how things really changed in terms of, you know, if we think about the printing press back when that was there was a certain interval of time that people had to wait for things, and then broadcast media and then social media, and you were right at that inflection point to see how the immediacy of things changes the way that we perceive events and this acceleration of things, and being around all that, did that have an impact on you?
Probably, yeah. I think if you talk to anyone in the news world, either they numb themselves, there's a lot of drinking that happens at the end of the day, or like you have to disconnect yourself from the news. You're constantly on, right? Your nervous system is constantly on because there'll be breaking news. You'll think, oh, you could step back. It's the end of the day. I'm going to just disconnect, have a dinner. And then if a news story happens, and depending on the company you work for, or if you have your own company, you have to figure out a way to cover it right away. So there's a feeling.
Something's always trending.
Exactly. And so you kind of need to decide. And for me, as it's evolved, we definitely cover things that are timely and in real time. But I've also had to figure out, like, what's our added value? Because we're never going to be first. You could say, maybe we'll sometimes. But so if we're not first, how are we adding value? And that's how I try to shape the editorial voice and figure out what is our place in this ecosystem that is growing. And there's other companies that have a lot more resources than us. And then there's other companies that are just starting out, but they're having that momentum, right? And we're kind of in the middle, and we've been around. So how do you continue that momentum? That is hard. And there's been many years that I pushed myself to a place to keep up, not just with the feed, but to stand out. And there's again another pro and con to being early, because we're early, so we've been around for a long time. We've learned a lot of lessons. We've had our profiles for a long time. That builds a following, etc. But you could also plateau, right? That momentum doesn't stay always. Like, there's maybe the first 5 years, and then you'll see a lot of creators and also independent media companies kind of fall by the wayside because it's hard to keep up and figure out your models without that momentum. So we've had to rejigger things. Like, every few years, I'll have sometimes new teams come in, or just saying, like, where is this space at now? And how do we want to provide value? And I'm constantly iterating in that way. And also, what's our business model? Because the models on social media are always changing. So I feel like now I'm at a place where I'm empowered by it in a way. I've figured it out. It took me over almost 15 years in a way. Let's do the math. But I think over time, it really impacted me and my mental health, because again, when we were winning and when I had a lot of successes on social, it felt awesome. But the minute we were not getting traction, or no one's watching, listening, it hits your own personal self-worth.
Yeah, definitely.
And you feel like, what's wrong with me? I'm a failure. What's the point? Like, I got into those negative thought spirals.
Definitely.
And then also I've told this story, separating from CBS News was really difficult. That was very public. And, being in my late 20s and working so hard to get there, that was a big kind of career moment for me that really impacted things. And then, then going independent is not easy. I think a lot of people talk about it now, like, it has a bit of like glamour or coolness to it. But at the time, it felt more like, how am I going to do this? And you're just kind of trying to stay above water barely.
Yeah.
And that could also really hit your nervous system a lot.
Definitely.
So I feel like I was going through a lot of ups and downs over a decade. And then finally you're like, that, as you know, because you're in this space, I feel like the mental health psychology world, when you're going through those, pushes and pulls constantly with your nervous system, it impacts your behaviors. And unless you're super aware, you might be doing things that are self-sabotaging and hurting yourself and the other people around you, and you don't realize. It took me like a decade, I think I'm going through that, to finally be like, am I happy? What's going on? In that moment, realizing, okay, I have to start working on myself. Because a lot of the stuff is happening around me. It's really busy, very successful, blah, blah, blah. But like, who am I outside of what's trending? Yeah,
and it's a difficult thing, I think, to go on your own in your 20s. I was at LinkedIn after graduation, left like a month after I turned 23 and was full-time with Authentic Social. And I think it's interesting because I think you and I have the similarity of being on the authenticity piece before it became overplayed, but I actually like it as a play on words because I don't think it's possible to be authentic on social media, and I like the truly the play on words a little bit, and I think the idea around what's trending is interesting too, because it's like, how do you find balance within these catchphrases or terms? And I think what's interesting about things though is that when I think about 2017 when I went full time, it was a good time to go full time. Like there was a lot of, I had the way I was able to leave LinkedIn was I had contracts that exceeded my salary. And so I never had to take venture capital. It was great. But I think about some of the things that I did at the beginning of my career, and I'm like, now AI would be doing some of these things. I was doing a lot of social selling strategy and messaging, and I still think that there's a great human touch to that. But I think a lot about the seniors in college right now and how this job market's changing, and how because of that, a lot of people are thinking about the creator economy and glamorizing it a bit. And I think that the reality, when you pull back the curtain, is much different around what this entails. And I know that my job is not full-time content creator. I have the company Authentic Social, and I do a lot of public speaking, but a part of it is content creation. And I do see what that involves and how that idea of being perceived and having to put yourself out there and getting, when you're I'm sure you have this feeling of when you're going to bed, but a video is going viral, and then you wake up and you have to filter through the comments, and it's just this crazy feeling. And I think that sometimes people don't know how to prepare themselves for it. And so I thought that your resources around creators for mental health is really interesting, because I think a lot of times people think that creators are monolith, that it's just the people who make millions of dollars, that it's this easy lifestyle, which is true for some people. There are people who make millions of dollars and hawk items that are silly and that they don't actually believe in, and it's something that I think people look down upon. That's one piece of it. But there are a lot of people who provide a lot of great value on the internet, and who are speaking about a lot of important topics, and for whom it's a little bit more akin to the gig economy and to fractional employment than it is to some glamorous replacement for, say, big law or private equity type salaries. And that reality around knowing things like, for example, how long it takes to get paid for things. Like sometimes it's net 60, sometimes it's net 90.
We're trying to change that.
Things around that.
Totally.
And so walk me through, so for context, you did a study around creators and mental health. You surveyed over 500 creators around some of these topics, very diverse audience, and United States based, I believe.
North America,
North America based. So tell me a little bit about the inspiration for that study, and we'll get into some of the data in a second, which is why for the first time I have my phone on progression to analog.
We just want to make sure we want to be present instead of my brain sometimes remembers things, sometimes doesn't, so we want to give grace. So having done what's trending and been in the space for 2 decades, I had gone through my own mental health journey, personal growth journey, as I mentioned, and then witnessing my peers, just complete lack of support. And it was really disheartening to see these people that would get so much attention, and yet when they were going through a really bad time, it was crickets.
Yeah.
And I experienced that, and it was devastating, you know, and it puts you in a really bad place that you could become a statistic.
Yeah.
Right. And so having gone through that, and then going through my own journey, I'd started a wellness organization, and then I had an ability to do an event in 2024, and I just happened to call it Creators for Mental Health, because the brands at the time wanted to bring together creators and then mental health. So let's just call it Creators for Mental Health. But the response was so amazing. After that, we had more events, and I went into 2025 building it more into an initiative. But that said, a lot of the questions that came up as I was building and going was, what are creators going through? You know, what are you seeing? What are they telling you? And while I had anecdotes, and I know from lived experience, it's not like rocket science to figure this out, I didn't have data, right? And there was not really any data around it. Some companies had done it for marketing, but it wasn't deep. And so that's why I decided to do this study to really inform the work we're doing. And I got into my research era because, you know, as a creative, this was something new. And I partnered with Lupiani Insights and Strategies, a researcher, and got some brands on board. Shout out, because people put their money where their mouth is. You know how hard it is, you know, it's expensive to do a study, by the way.
Oh, I know. I'm doing one right now on my own.
And so I got, let's just see if I remember, Be Real. I got Opus, Stratosphere, Social Current. Check those companies out. They're awesome. They support creators. And they gave me money to do the study, which, of course, you don't know what's going to happen or how it's going to look good or bad for the industry. So we found some obvious stats, right, around, you know, financial instability and insecurity, just feeling that people checking their stats way too much, and the validation around that. We also found, you know, burnout, imposter syndrome, isolation was existent in this industry. But I think some of the other really interesting stats and sobering ones, like heartbreaking ones, was that 1 in 10 creators have suicidal ideation based on their work. 9 out of 10 have no support specific for them around what they're going through as a content creator. So you have to imagine we're going through unique things, like you said, be going viral. We could be getting harassment online, and you know, the feeling of putting yourself out there, and yet no one around us in our professional realm or otherwise knows how to support us with that. That
definitely.
is
and a lot of times it's not spoken about. I mean, when I was 23, I had just left LinkedIn, and this, actually, he's somewhat famous person. He started to stalk me from Instagram, would watch my stories, and started joining the gym I was at, and would show up and be right next to me on the treadmill, and was just, you know, 20 years older than me, really creepy. And it made me realize around, you know, at a young age, how much you have to be careful around your safety too. I think when that Kim Kardashian thing came out with the jewels in Paris too, I think that was a big eye-opening thing for everyone, that maybe we shouldn't be posting things in real time. So now everything I post on my story is on at least a 2-hour delay, because I just don't want people to know where my location is. And I think that what I found around that experience was that while my friends were supportive, there weren't a lot of people who understood what I was going through in that moment. And I think that some resource groups or support groups could come out of your study around, okay, how can we get people who aren't, again, it's not always the people who have 200, 300, 400,000 followers who are having these things happen to them. It can sometimes be, I think at that time, I had like 20,000 followers, and it can be really totally different realms. And it's smaller things where sometimes it's just one person messaging you all the time, and it can be this micro harassments or things that are going on. And it's tough because it's not as easy as just logging off. And I think that's the interesting thing about progression to analog, is the number one question that I've gotten, which is what I'm hoping to talk a little bit about with you today, is that a lot of creators message me and they say, I would love to be analog, but I can't. And so that's why I think that I have a different voice in this analog trend, is that it's not always about throwing your phone into into your desk drawer and putting it away, because for a lot of us, we can't do that. People that I speak to are in precarious positions with employment, or with they're with their relationships, or with I'm doing a big study on this now, getting more data on it, but that's an issue. So it's about how can we take the time that we are away from our phones and make it count, versus have every single second, you know, be analog. And I think that's, you know, perhaps one of the takeaways from the study.
It was actually one of some of the things, we did this well-being score, and we found the negative well-being is associated with, one, checking your analytics consistently, which again, I'm guilty of. And then Also, doing over 21 plus hours of unpaid labor, which is even crazy if you think about the week and how many people are doing that much unpaid labor, meaning you're giving more than you're getting, right? In many ways. And that leads to burnout. And then the positive well-being score was connected to kind of what you're talking about, which is really taking care of yourself and doing self-care, you know, exercising, eating well, and taking care of yourself. So it really just shows those things that we talk about that could be cliche are just so important. We have the data. Well, we know this. I mean, that shows that you doing those small things does make a huge difference. And then you can give back more to yourself and your audience and the work you do and enjoy it more.
Definitely. So I'm going to run through some of the statistics from the study, go through all of it, and then have you comment on some of the ones that stick out to you. So as we said before, 1 in 10 say that they experience suicidal ideation, and the most recent NIH data shows a 5.5 incidence rate for US adults. So this is almost double that. Yeah. That's really significant. And then content creators face a number of stressors commonly linked to negative mental health outcomes in their content creation roles, some of which are financial instability, obsession over performance. And the obsession over performance piece is difficult too, because if we take, for example, the recent algorithm change with TikTok, you could have a 20-second average watch time on your video and still not have it do well. So it's this obsession that sometimes there's not a way to get rid of that, because it's just you know, depending on so much with the platforms. I speak a lot about technofeudalism and how we're a bit of serfs to these platforms, and that we depend on them for our digital land or digital real estate, and it's a difficult process.
You know, I put the report a few days ago because I was trying to catch up on it going into this podcast through Notebook LM, and they did the podcast around it. Yeah. You know how you could do the podcast, and I got so many ideas of how to talk about it, and they said algorithmic bosses. We have these bosses that are the algorithm now, right? Which I think is such a powerful way to say it. And I also say, imagine your boss, like these platforms are our bosses, but imagine you don't have access to them. They could change your work at any point, whenever they want. There's no transparency, and there's no sense of accountability.
The majority of content creators do not have access to specialized support for mental health, but you were saying, I think this is an interesting and unique problem in the United States too, because the access to healthcare is really intertwined with having institutional employment. And so that process is really difficult, expensive. I know that when I turned 25 and had to go off of my parents' health insurance, it was $750 a month until I got married. So that's a lot. And sometimes people just will forgo it. And that's really difficult.
And that's why, not to add this in, but part of Creators for Mental Health is services. And we partnered with a company, Revive Health Therapy in California, to do discounted sliding scale therapy. California, I'm trying to go national with it. So people could get access, you know, it's as low as $60 an hour, right? And then you're seeing the same therapist. It's not just like cycling new therapists.
Totally.
And you don't need to do a package, because a lot of times even packages, like we can't afford that. You don't know when, you know, in a month where your money's coming from, so you don't want to be spending that next month. So, you know, I think it connects, creators connect with the whole freelancer and solopreneur and gig economy, really. So I like to say we want to help the creator, but we also want to help the economy around the creator.
Definitely.
Which is, by the way, a $500 billion economy by 2030. There's 1.5 million content creators in the U.S. according to IAB. So it's like you would think, okay, we should care about this as a workforce, a workplace. Why don't we? So again, you'll continue these stats, but it's always interesting because people will say, like, why should I care? And I go, well, I'm looking at it more as, instead of your perception of what an influencer is, and you thinking we're like Mr. Beast, which bless his heart, a lot of us aren't. We're not, you know, that big, getting all those opportunities. But like, this is a workforce,
definitely,
and it's how you're all getting your news and entertainment. And you, according to other studies like Pew Research, you rather get your news and entertainment from us. How are we going to survive to continue doing that?
Definitely. And a lot of it is not just around therapy, because therapy is a very positive tool, but we also have to realize that it is intertwined with capitalism, meaning that a lot of the therapists want to keep you coming back because that is the way that they make money. And so what I think therapy is a great tool to be paired with something like peer support. And the problem with creators is that it's not like if you work in a traditional office, you could go to a lot of your friends and be able to talk about those similar problems. And so creating support groups and networks that are a little bit more natural and community-based is a great thing to pair with something like therapy, because then maybe if the financial resources aren't there for someone to go to therapy every single week, that they could say, okay, I can go once a month and check in with my therapist, but I can also be, you know, connecting with this peer group and going around that. Something else that's interesting is that the data suggests that content creators would make use of some of those solutions, because some might be thinking, well, if those solutions were there, would they make use of them? So that is something that you saw. But there is a big gap between content creators and available support, and that fewer than 1 in 10 content creators describe their mental health support as excellent. So that is interesting. I think, again, has a lot to do with the fact that they're independent contractors, that there's not that institutional piece of the health insurance. And I know that even for me, when I was going through it, I was lucky enough my parents were entrepreneurs, and so they understood a lot about how to set up the health insurance piece. And I think that a lot of people don't. A lot of my friends have come to me and said, hey, can you help me with how to do this? Because it's just not very clear. And I think sometimes there can be that executive dysfunction with people, because I have ADHD. I totally understand where it's so difficult that sometimes you forget and you don't realize that, oh, there's only an open enrollment period for this 1 month, or you can miss things, and then the deductible's high, and it's really a difficult thing. But I think knowing that nearly 2 in 3 creators say that they're experiencing mental health challenges such as anxiety and depression, with higher rates among more tenured creators, that's interesting.
I found that to be really interesting. That you would think, oh, well, maybe this is something you experience at the beginning of your career because it's something new. The stresses, the new pressures, but it gets worse as you continue. And it also gets worse if the bigger you are. So that goes also back to having some sort of support systems. Even though you're a huge creator, there's this idea like, well, you have it all, you have it made, you figured it out. But a lot of times there's a lot of mentorship and a lot of these groups even that pop up on the platform level around emerging creators and all that, and support, which is so important. But I think a lot of the bigger creators and people that have been there around longer, you can't forget about those folks too. And unfortunately, even some recent individuals who tragically died by suicide, both were this is in the US and close to the holiday, both were huge creators. And there's this idea, people think because of the perception of your success, of course we know, or where you're at, like, oh, you have it made, you should be fine. And that's obviously not the case. A lot of times those are the people struggling the most, because there is this perception of who they are and like where they're at and the reality of what's happening, and they don't really share that. Right. So I just think it's important to have support systems throughout the career and the life of a creator, even if they've been around a long time. Don't forget the creators that have been around. Like I've been around, 2 decades, and thankfully I've built my own foundation and support systems, but a lot of people haven't.
Yeah, and I think we can link this back to the idea of authenticity. And I think that sometimes people obsess over this idea and think that what it means to be authentic online is to share everything about your life. And I think that one thing that creators can do to protect themselves is to create a little bit of distance between them and their audience. And that's what traditional broadcasters do. And as creators are becoming as popular, if not more, as some traditional broadcast channels, I think creating some of that distance is not inauthentic, it's healthy. You don't have to share every single detail of your life online to be authentic. It's just making sure that you're not sharing things that are false or misleading. That is, to me, what being authentic means online. It's around creating some distance, creating some boundaries, because that is the other thing of the porous nature of this work, is that there's really no boundaries between it. And I like to think of this phrase, the contentification of everyday life. That was something that when I modeled for Vineyard Vines for about a year and was doing a lot with content, I found myself turning social events into content all the time. I think that's a natural thing with some parts of work. For example, if we're going to a big dinner, you want to post it online, but having to post everything and feeling like I needed to post everything was just not healthy. And it wasn't pressure coming from Vineyard Vines or anything. It was coming from me, because I'm like, oh, I'm growing. I need to be showing people. It was that time in 2017 when people, wanted to go live all the time. It's all these pieces that I think are really difficult. And I found it, difficult with some friends that I've had to separate from. I had one girl who was getting really big online, and we would hang out, and she just would go live every time we were hanging out. And I was like, I can't deal with this, because I actually want to take some time to talk to you about some of these things. And there needs to be, but at the same time, obviously that's always chasing that next like and follow and everything. And I think it's someone who does a good job about talking about some of these boundaries, I think, is Brandon. He talks a lot about
check him out.
Boundaries and how you can create boundaries, and how, but at the same time, he's honest about it. And he's like, listen, to be a successful creator, you need to be posting every day. And so it's that you are choosing to enter into a career where there are going to be some of these challenges. And I think that knowing yourself and figuring out, am I in a place in my life where I can do this.
Yeah.
But then the difficult part is that sometimes people might not be in that place, but it might be the only really lucrative financial thing that they can do because of the way that the economy shifted so much. I mean, the recent job report said that things are great, but really if you dive deep into it, it's not. It's the worst year for college grads in over a decade.
Yeah.
It's not a good, much more than over a decade, because when I graduated in 2016, it was really good. So that's a really challenging thing, I think, that we're seeing, as well as things are shifting and people aren't really sure what this reshuffling is going to bring.
You just said something that really important is knowing yourself. And that goes back to disconnecting, to reconnect the phrases and doing the work, right? And just knowing what your needs are, because how I use my phone and how I stay connected and what makes me feel good and bad is different than you.
Definitely.
And that's the reality.
Definitely.
And of course, we could provide suggestions and recommendations, but only you know what you need and how you can thrive and what brings you joy. My boyfriend, for instance, does a job where he's not on his phone a lot. So at night and on his off time, he could be on his phone and it's not draining to him.
Yeah.
Me, because my work is on my phone, when I'm not working or having to be like on top of it, I do not want to be on my phone because I'm already feeling drained. So behaviorally, we do different things because the nature of our work. And I also think when you're doing so much on your phone and like capturing stuff, what is that line between living and recording?
Exactly.
Right. And that there's that famous picture of I think it could have been in France, but it was New Year's Eve and everyone is on their phone shooting. It's the beautiful fireworks. And then all you see are phones. Yeah. And it's this moment like, are we actually enjoying what's happening around us? And are we being present for that? How present can you be if you're looking at it through the lens of a phone? Yeah. Right. And so I think about that a lot, which is why for me, I create some of these strategies, I guess, where I'll capture something quickly and then put it down.
That's,
right? So if there's like something happening, something really amazing, I'll quickly get it. I'll capture it. I'll get the shot that I know it looks good.
Yeah, when you go to an event, you take the pictures at the beginning when the hair and makeup's still good, and then you put the phone away.
Put the phone away. But I've now gotten to the point where I actually, I won't post in real time, not wanting people to know where I am, but it also is that I just don't want to be that person on my phone constantly. Totally. And I was at an event last night even, and there was someone next to me who is trying to be more in her content creator era. So she was constantly on her phone, IG story. I go, wow, you're amazing. Like, it's amazing when you have the muscle and you actually decide to put it down. It's harder to get back into it. Yeah. And so for me, like, a lot of times I'll either post on IG story after the fact or I'll post one thing quickly and then I'll put down my phone. But to the point where now I've gotten so used to not being as good at text. Like I feel like I used to be so good at constantly checking, and I'm good at my emails and everything. But it's a muscle that you need to decide where you want to put your muscle.
Definitely.
Right. Do you have days? I have a question. Do you have days or times that you have a day off from your phone, or how do you do that? I know you sometimes disconnect from social, like posting on social, but.
Yeah, I will sometimes take long periods off from social. So when I was starting, I had 2 concussions last year. Most people might know that. And they're not even good stories. I have POTS syndrome, low blood pressure, and it was literally from hitting my head on the wall trying on a dress for my rehearsal dinner, and then the other one was the night before my wedding, and I didn't even have any drinks the night before my wedding, but the other concussion hadn't healed yet.
Oh no.
So what I found is that it's nice to take periods of time where I'm off, because I run an applied research lab, I do a lot of research, and sometimes it doesn't really make sense for me to be posting every day, all year, because then when am I really doing the research? I have periods where I am online, periods where I'm not online. Yeah. I think someone similar to that, someone who takes a similar strategy is Matty Healy, where he'll be completely online and then offline. I really like the internet and I like being online, but there's also times when I'm working on a creative project and I find it very difficult to get into that creative mode if I am constantly on my phone or if I'm trying to create content, because content creation takes a lot of effort and time and energy. So there was a 6-week, I also do experiments that I then share with my audience around going off of your phone. So I did 3 years off of TikTok and then went back on and shared what that experience was like. I did recently 6 weeks off of Instagram and TikTok, and that was just to reset and work on some of this upcoming study that I was working on. I really enjoyed it. I think that part of the problem though is that you do miss some things from socialization with friends, and you have to go more out of your way to see what's going on with people.
Yeah.
And so that can become isolating a bit. What I also tested after I came back on was for 2 weeks, I went onto the platforms, but I wouldn't let myself scroll. So I would post, but I could see the first thing that popped up on my feed or the stories. And that did not help.
Oh.
I thought it would, but it didn't. And I think that it's because that even 5 minutes on a platform can impact your mental health. Because, for example, one time when I opened Instagram, it was the mom of my former best friend from college, and it was her wedding photo, and it kind of made me sad, you know, and that it was only looking at one post. And usually I'm really happy to see those posts, but it was just a day that I was having a rough day.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that can be something that we don't always think about. And sometimes people are switching back and forth a lot between apps, and we think that just for going on for 30 seconds or only being on 30 minutes a day is okay, but sometimes that can really impact your mental health as well.
Course.
So I think the best thing for creators too is that like you can take a day off. Like it's not, I think a lot of creators think that it's impossible to take a day off, but the reality is that scheduling does exist for some of these platforms now, and you can do that once a week. If you just do that once a week, like that's okay, and you can give yourself that space to do that. And I want to go back to a couple of the things in the study that's related to this, because you were speaking about how the trust with their platforms.
Yeah.
And so that's really interesting because as I'm saying before, I think a lot of times people don't trust the algorithm. They feel like you need to be feeding the beast a lot, which is true. I will say I took 6 weeks off of TikTok, and the average watch time is
lower.
Well, the average watch time is high.
Okay.
It's like 18 seconds, but there's no reach.
But there's just,
So that's interesting is they do penalize you. So for me, I'm able to do that because it's not a primary source of income, but for people who it is, that's where it gets difficult. And that's why I think for creators, differentiating is important also, because I like to think of creators a little bit as professional athletes, and that sometimes you might only have a 5-year run that's your best run, or that mentally you can handle it. So differentiating and figuring out like what business can I supplement this with, or what service offering. But this distrust with platforms is very interesting in that only 1 in 5 creators say that they completely trust their primary platform, with trust declining as audience size increases, and that slightly more creators describe their relationship with social media platforms as personal rather than transactional. So you're putting a personal investment into something that's not reciprocated because these platforms are so transactional.
I joke around like it's a toxic relationship, right? Because you're putting so much of your own, there's a lack of trust, but you're putting so much of yourself into these platforms and your career and your future, your livelihood, and yet the uncertainty of whether you're going to get that back is really challenging. And I agree. I tell everyone that you need to have multiple revenue streams, right? Not just from platforms, but consulting, possibly paid speaking, obviously brand deals. Also, if you're an expert or you're really good at this, there's so many people also that you could work with and help.
Definitely.
We all need each other. So there's always ways to make money that doesn't just include it being from posting a video. But I also say it's, a marathon, not a sprint, that yes, you could have some videos that don't do well, which is hard. By the way, I still go through this where I give myself a bit of crap. I'll have a 24-hour period of looping of I should have done this. Could I put a more clickbaity title? Could I have done? And then I just need to move on to the next, right? Because it's not helping me. Right. And so in many ways, you taking time off, you need to think about it in the long run, what it does, right? And how much it can help you. And also, while I think a lot of creators feel like they're only as good as their last video, you also have to look at it. My hope is more people look at it as the totality of your career, right? You're not just a video creator, you have a career.
Exactly.
Right? And you have to look at like the entire thing and kind of look from a bird's eye view and distance yourself sometimes a bit, because if you're so in the trenches, it's hard to see that maybe how good you are and your value, because you're looking just at your current feed and your analytics from this month, even though it doesn't give you a sense of who you actually are and what you bring to the table overall. But it's hard because also the way brands look at you, and also these analytics platforms, like I was doing a brand deal or helping a brand actually find influencers, right? And so I had recommended someone, and it was someone who had been on maternity leave a bit. She just had a baby, so she was posting less. And you know what they said to me? They said, they didn't mention her being pregnant or anything or having a baby, but it was more, well, she doesn't seem to be as like posting as much and her analytics and all that. I go, yeah, because she just had a baby, but like she's still who she is. Like you're saying that just because she's a bit off the past 6 months, then she should be penalized for that. And she's being off because she had a child. But it just shows that for me was really eye-opening, and I had known that, but to hear from a brand side and how the analytics platforms were also kind of judging her, and the information they were giving back to the brands about this creator said a lot. Which is sad.
So I think if you're a creator, some things that you can take away from this in terms of tips for balance is seek mental health resources or group peer support. Find others in your cohort that reach out to them via DM. Don't be afraid to make friends and talk about those things together. 2 is create some boundaries around what you're doing. And maybe that's one day off a week where you're scheduling things, or if you have to be on every day, taking some time and some hours within those days to practice some time away from your phone. I think also not having your phone in the bedroom is possible for almost everyone except for doctors on call and some other jobs. And if you just leave your phone outside the bedroom, spend the first 10 minutes off of your phone. You don't have to do these things where people are saying an hour off your phone or anything. You don't need to buy any expensive things to have some parts of analog in your daily life. Just to wake up and for 10 minutes realize that there's a ground beneath you and there's a sky above you.
It's called mindfulness. That's a bit of mindfulness, right? Like
for the ADHD person, like I'm not gonna sit and meditate, but for me, I read nonfiction every morning. Whatever it is for people, that's something else. And then I think also diversifying what you're doing and figuring out what are some things longer term, because we can't be completely beholden to these platforms. Things can change on an everyday basis. You don't know what's going to be there tomorrow and what's not. And so figuring out some diversification is important. But I'm curious, in closing, around usually what I ask guests is what does progression to analog mean to you as someone who is in the creator world? What is the idea of balancing that with the analog world look like to you, or what advice can you give to others?
I think it's remembering who I am, not from just who I am on the phone and in the feed, but the analog of self. Right? And reconnecting with self and always coming back to that, because I do believe you can't fully bring your expression to the world if you yourself don't feel joy and an understanding of you and compassion and love for you. You could only bring so much to the work that you do, and you can't really bring your whole full self to this life.
Exactly. And
so just focusing on what really brings you joy, and sometimes that doesn't happen, like life isn't perfect and sometimes you have to just work, right? But like focusing on what brings you joy, not just like on your phone and in connection. Like my therapist always says, like, what can you do that doesn't involve something external to you?
Exactly.
Right? So it could be like, moving your body, going outside on a walk, just reminding yourself of who you are, whether all this stuff is here or all of it is not. And there's and when you really lean into that is a lot of beauty.
Yeah, definitely. And I think your work with Harvard Chan School is important too, because it's showing that this is becoming a public health issue.
It's wild.
And that's important for people to understand, is that even just knowing that there are institutions, major institutions that are realizing that this is an issue, that you're not alone, and knowing that there are resources out there. So how can people keep in touch with not only you, but also creators for mental health, or get involved?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Follow me at Shira Lazar everywhere, at creators, and then #4 mental health. We're going to be launching a lot of cool things in the next year. We are talking about monthly mental health check-ins on Zoom, building more of that community and peer support group on a platform that we all use, not making you necessarily no problematic platforms, but and then also events, offline events, getting people offline and connecting in person as well and collaborating, and just making sure that our needs are heard and seen, because this is a big enough industry. There's enough money going into it, and not being forgotten as the workers who are part of it. And I'm part of the Creator Bill of Rights with Congressman Ro Khanna also. So we're going to be doing a lot of that, and a lot of the things around health benefits or customer support from platforms. and pathways to monetization. These are things we're talking about that their infrastructure, all of this is connected to infrastructure to make this industry more legit, less Wild West, so it could be more sustainable and healthy for all of us.
Before we wrap, I'd love to know a little bit more about this Creator Bill of Rights that you just spoke about.
Yeah, the Creator Bill of Rights was really informed by the work I was doing for Creators for Mental Health and realizing the solutions that were needed and the gaps with the platforms. And so I connected with Congressman Ro Khanna, who showed a lot of interest, and we launched this resolution, which is basically a framework for the needs that we have as a workforce, really, and to be recognized as a business class, as well as small businesses, and getting those perks, as well as protections around IP and likeness when it comes to AI. Again, as I mentioned, pathways to monetization on the platforms who are monetizing off of us, right? You shouldn't be able to work unpaid labor. Like that would be illegal in any other industry. And yet we're working and we're giving, and yet we're not getting paid back. And then also, making sure that they are responsive to us. If we're building on their platforms and the idea that no one will respond if your profile is shut down or something is limited is an issue. It's a consumer protection in a way, as well as being able to own our audience, possibly decentralization. So it's all these kind of big ideas, but then also that feel pretty reasonable, especially if we're going to be living and working on these platforms a lot, making sure that the things that we have that protect us in other industries or offline are being put into place online too.
Definitely. And I'll link some more information about that in the description.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This is a fascinating conversation. I could keep going for
hours.
I
love your work. This is so cool. I'm so happy we got to make this work.
Thank you.